First took this site proposition to Angle to talk to Thomas about. Surely not that site. There must be another hospital, a better site that you could give me. And we said, no, it's that site or nothing. And we're so glad we did, because I don't even think that imagery really quite portrays the steepness of the site. I mean, although it was a patch of grass, it's the only bit of grass in the entire St James's complex. And you couldn't sit on it, it was so steep. And all of a sudden you've got this accessibility of layering and views out over the city. So it really is a miracle of a building, and we're so glad that Thomas was brave enough with his team to take it on. So I suppose what I want to do is just kind of backtrack a little bit and just sort of tell you the story about Maggie's and sort of why we exist. And we were started by a woman who had a diagnosis of breast cancer. She came to the West General Hospital in Edinburgh. She had been told her cancer had come back, and she'd been told that she had 3 months to live. And I happened to be at that time her cancer nurse, and was the person who was her kind of liaison person, the person who administered her chemotherapy. And what she talked about was, and I think this is very much kind of to John's point earlier, is that she was very happy with her NHS care. She felt her clinical team was doing a brilliant job. But there was a number of things that she felt was missing, and it was, what could she do to help herself? What could she do to deal with the kind of myriad of things that her family and friends were suggesting to her? How could she better talk to her children about her diagnosis? Why wasn't it that when you came to the hospital you didn't leave feeling better than when you arrived because of the strip lights and the lack of views? Rather than the yippee, it's my day to see my clinical team, to get an opportunity to have my worries and concerns and questions answered. So she wasn't critical of the NHS per se, but she identified for herself and her group of fellow patients that were sitting in an internal waiting area with no views of nature and light, that there could be an opportunity to do something better. Angle sort of gave this quote, and that kind of, I suppose, embodies the essence of Maggie's. Now, where we were lucky was Maggie was married to an architectural critic and writer, and I think a great friend of yours, Sinad, was that they had the ability, when she was in remission from her treatment and she was able to survive a further 18 months, was to look at, he was a visiting professor at Los Angeles, and looked at what they did to provide support for people going through cancer. And so she came back from that visit with the idea of creating a place that people could come to that was on hospital grounds, that was easy to make that first step through the front door when one had had a diagnosis. When starting with that, oh my goodness, what have I been told? What does the treatment implications mean for me and my work life, my financial life, my future? And that it could be a place where it could be to process some of those worries and concerns, but that was adjacent to and worked with the clinical teams in the hospital. And it was very much a kind of helping, and in a way this is where the architects are really critical to Maggie's, is as we see them as the investigator of the kind of social problem that we had in our particular field of cancer, which was people with cancer tell us about feeling isolated and alone, feelings of out of control, not understanding what had happened to them, not feelings of hopelessness, and so in a way the building is part of offering a sense of control back, of offering a sense of hope back, and offering a sense of not feeling lonely, as well as what the staff and the people who work in Maggie's do. So if you like, our buildings is part of the caring team that supports Maggie's. And I think it was also, I think John's still here, but John made a point about being an active participant, being a passive participant, which is very much the challenge of our NHS system, and I was part of it. I was one of those clinical colleagues that was about processing people kindly and thoughtfully, but with limited time, and it was about getting the drugs in and the patient out so that the next person could come in. And it was about how could one move from being a passive recipient to being an active recipient within one's cancer care and treatment. And one has to do that very thoughtfully and carefully and bespokely, because every person who comes to us at Maggie's door has got a whole different set of stuff that they're coming with, whether or not that's their age, socioeconomic, their cancer stage, their culture, their religion, etc. So the kind of process of nudging people to becoming active participants, to thinking about exercise and diet. It's not about bringing in and putting people through a programme, but helping people work out what would be the thing, most things for them that would help them feel in control. And that might be learning how to boil an egg because wife's got cancer and husband's never had to cook. And it might be about wanting to think about improving the diet and adding in a vegetable with the fish and chips. And so the design of the building, and I think often people might wonder about Maggie's as being a kind of slightly fancy thing, fancy architecture, not I'm saying, but that it's sort of not a necessity. And I think we've sort of forgotten the kind of role that our civic buildings, and again I think Meredith, you sort of kind of mentioned about your building is offering something to the civics community of Lewis, is that today's society, this was a great library. A lot of our civic buildings are being built by the corporate world rather than the beautiful town halls, public spaces where communities could come together. And so I think if Maggie's is a challenge is that we shouldn't dismiss the opportunity in our public spaces, and in our case it's for people with cancer and their family and friends. Why shouldn't they be places of beauty where the soul is nourished and hopefulness is offered? And last week, Annabel, we had Kevin MacLeod in your building, talking about doing some filming for Grand Designs. And there was about 100 folks coming through the centre that day, so it was working as normal. And they all went up to him and said, "I love your show, Kevin. Don't like that house, don't like that one." And then of course he was asking them about what they thought about the building. And in Maggie's world, I've often come across people who don't think that beauty is something of that should be necessarily that everyone will enjoy. And I think I would argue that certainly that everyone came in, had a view about design, about building, they were passionate about it, there were things that they were like understanding how it was constructed, but all walks of life can appreciate and feel beauty. And I think one of my frustrations is how we, as a society and other building types that are for the public, can make sure that we bring beauty into it. And I suppose our projects are tiny and small, but by being in hospital grounds, they are offering up a haven, a place of refuge. But also, it is nudging the NHS to think about the patient experience, about the opportunity for the environment. And we've certainly seen pockets of amazing thoughtfulness, and just like I think you're caught in the tension of that in Leeds, but there are some leaders within the estates world who are trying to fight against the kind of challenges. So I just wanted to give you a quick kind of view of some of our centres. So this is our first one in Edinburgh. This was the one Maggie was still alive at the time when she identified this derelict building on the hospital grounds. Yeah, it was originally the gardens. It was part of the old work hospital, so it's where the horses went, and then the gardeners used it. And then we inverted it with a local Edinburgh architect called Richard Murphy to create this environment, which is directly adjacent to the cancer centre and chemotherapy unit. And what that first centre offered for us was an opportunity for to show how people could come in and talk about their doctor and their nurse and their clinical treatment without fear of that perhaps implicating in their clinical relationships with their teams, where they could get some thoughts about how they could enhance that relationship. But having our own front door, it meant that when treatment finished, they could come back to an environment that was non-clinical, didn't smell of the hospital, where they could start that survivorship challenge for many people, which is dealing with the post-cognitive brain dysfunction, chemotherapy, it's the body image changes that might have come from their hormone therapy that they're taking, that life has offered up some changes around what they may be, their future dreams and hopes, and how to recalibrate that. And so I think we heard a bit about that in your project, is how to incorporate this social, psychological, emotional and practical care that enables people to move on with their life alongside great technical and clinical care. This was our first centre that we did in England. Most of our sites are pretty challenging. This is alongside Fulham Palace Road with very tall Charing Cross Hospital. We again, just as the Heatherwick building I think shows us, is if you integrate at the point of design nature and gardens alongside architecture, you get something magical. When we first started our centre, we did the garden as a secondary project. We didn't quite have enough money, so we cut that budget because we had to get the building, that was the most important thing. And so we kind of learned after we got our first couple of centres underway, is that we had to hold tight to the whole budget, make sure that we had everything in place, and let an integrated design and garden and landscape go. And one of the things that nature offers up is also the shifts from, it's ever changing. So art plays a role in Maggie's. It could be challenging, it could be domestic, but nature through the seasons, opportunity, it gives distraction, it gives it gives a way of conversations. Pete Aldoff very much talked about the beauty of plants in winter in decay, and again that can offer up sometimes an opportunity to have a very rich conversation with people who are thinking about and approaching end of life. So this, I swear to you, is a Fulham Palace Road, Charing Cross Hospital, and that is the view from within the centre. This is our latest centre that we just opened just a year ago in Southampton. It was Amanda Levitt was the architect alongside Sarah Price. And it's in a sea of car parks. You've just sunk the building down slightly so that when you're in the building you get the entire very small garden coming in, so you get the full impact. This is our Oxford Centre. It's literally 100 metres from the cancer centre, but we've positioned it in a nature reserve that the hospital couldn't build on. It's on stilts, it's by Wilkinson in the air, and it's just, people are transformed into a different world from having where their chemotherapy and radiotherapy is delivered. Oldham, we've got a centre in Manchester. A donor came along and said, I'll help you with your centre in Manchester, but only if you do one in Oldham, because it's the centre of the universe. You may think it's Lewis, but apparently it's Oldham. And the Scots person, I had to say to him, I didn't know where Oldham was. But we have this, again, a sort of rotten site, but Alex de Rijk of DRMM was able to position this most beautiful building. And Alex, at the time, his partner was going through cancer, and I think as we heard about the importance of wood, often when people are having a treatment, they get peripheral neuropathy and very painful feet and fingers. So touch, warmth, acoustics are really important for the sensitivities of the body. Alex is one of our greatest ambassadors, that wood is one of those fantastic antibacterial materials, and yet hospitals don't like them at all. Just don't like them. So, don't know why. Why? What story?
Hygiene.
I know, but it's not true.
I know.
Again, so Oldham is a deprived community. We've got a centre in Lanarkshire and in Kirkcaldy. And so I just want to emphasise, being for all cancers, how beautiful architecture and spaces linked with nature on hospital grounds are also places for the hospital staff to come in and benefit from and utilise the space. And of course we've seen extraordinary images of these already from Angle. I think yours is much better. And we're working on some new centres, so we have 24 Maggies across the UK. There's over 60 cancer centres, so we've got an awful lot more to do. And we're actively working on centres for Northampton, Coventry, Bristol and Cambridge. So we hope that there will be more. Northampton was Stephen Marshall, this is Jamie Borber, and I haven't got images yet for Bristol or Cambridge. Thank you.
Well, that's amazingly inspiring. I think Lewis is going to be inspired and transformed. And you're going to be. So I think we got 10 minutes for some questions.
We're working to relax Lewis time. So there's 10 minutes can kind of concertina into short order.
Well, I think we should feel free, please.
It seems that there's a very big elephant in the room. Also, Lewis President had experiences of the UCH department sitting in this kind of surreal, wonderful old space, but no out of doors at all to get my view at the time. But there's a big elephant in the room in terms of the control that you as a citizen have on big developments. Even community groups. So we are lucky here, Oliver is here, doing all these amazing people, you to speak to us, some people that are making decisions, also listening, so something will happen. But most of the time, the people that control the budgets, the investment, they don't need our input. So there is a top-down, building with nature was a brilliant talk, because the top-down kind of imperative to build with nature will go into a top-down organization that builds in this way. But I don't think there is a culture here of democratic kind of way of building. It's not the habit of British society. Or maybe many societies are not like this anyway. So I feel that this is the big elephant in the room. So we have a lot of intentions, a lot of good ideas, but if the developer or government are not listening, it's not going to happen. It's not a democratic process.
I mean, this is a conversation that already we've all touched on just this evening about exactly that point. So anybody
one more
disagree
remark about Lambeth. Lambeth, I used to work in the school down in Lambeth, and one of the women in the film that was talking was in our garden. And the one big thing about Lambeth is that it, for years, has been investing in green infrastructure, community groups, Incredible Edinburgh, all the organizations that are working in Lambeth, along Lambeth, to do this green revolution that is ground.
Is that the beginnings of the answer to your own question? Which is, if they can do it.
Look at the politics of Lambeth.
So let's take a few more.
Yes, Lewis is a neighbourhood plan.
Yes.
Went to a referendum. So in a sense, that sort of democracy is starting. I think we're pretty hot on our neighbourhood plan. And also the local plan, South Wales Central Park plan, which we really hold on to. And that is that has been created by the community.
And you feel a sense that that is going to go, if not 100%, the way you want it to go?
I think it really does influence what is developed in this area.
That's very encouraging. Gemma, you going to pass?
I just wanted to respond really to, I think neighbourhood planning is a really important. Yeah, sure. Neighbourhood planning is a really important kind of evolution of planning generally. But my response really, one of the things I've built into Build with Nature in direct response to this issue of collaborative, co-participative design, which is lacking, is you have to, it's a statutory requirement of every single development which has to go through planning. So there are permitted developments, but let's put them to one side. So every application that has to go through the planning process has a statutory requirement to consult the community. And let's remember, community is not a homogenous blob. So there's lots of issues around barriers to that formal required engagement process. But what we look for through our schemes and what we're trying to influence more broadly, because it's not just people who come to us to get an accreditation, the standards are open source, we're trying to influence as many people as possible, is the so what question. So if you tick a box that says you've engaged the community, you've had a number of workshops, you've followed a certain set of principles, so what? How is your design different because of it? And too often, brilliant designers miss that. And so I feel like that's an important kind of additional layer of accountability that needs to come from the community, where people feel empowered and have agency, but from actually the formal processes, specific process we go through. You're going to respond to that?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it's interesting because recently Public Health, we've just set up a Healthy Places team, which has got 2 planning people as part of the team, because I'm by no means an expert. And we're in the process of consulting on neighbourhood plans and local plans, and we're trying to weave in health and well-being. And recently I looked at the Lewis, one of the neighbourhood plans for Lewis, and again in the vision there was no mention of health, well-being in there, and I wanted it right in there. So there is the power to consult as a community, and there are different stages of consultation, and also in terms of as an application sort of progresses or a development progresses. There is something about communities getting to grips, as complicated as it is, where your power is within the planning system and where your opportunities are. And there are different kind of agencies. There's organisations like Health Watch, that you can go to, who are there to kind of be a critical friend to the system around community concerns. And planning is obviously one of those issues. One of my sort of pickups was around living with beauty. So there is a very contentious report that came out, I think, in 2018, where the language, and I absolutely agree, there's a term, dare I say it, and apologies for the swearing, called shit syndrome, which is basically about people living in areas that are considered shit, and people continuously having the same conversation about how shit a place is. And all that does to the people and to the place is re-stigmatise. It doesn't change the conversation about the place or the people. And so
What is your point about the beauty?
So what I'm saying is
it that we should actually not use pejorative?
No, so it's okay to use living with beauty. I think is really important. We do need that. But sometimes at the moment in the current planning world, there is some rhetoric around that. And some of the pushback around that is living with beauty with no substance. And what I'm seeing here is beautiful beauty with absolute substance. And I think that needs to come across so much more strong than just the living with beauty.
Yes.
So just a word or two from the perspective of the developer. Well, actually, even prior to that, I don't think it's an elephant in the room. We know that that's the circumstance under which we're living, and unfortunately, I'd say it's up to us. It's up to each one of us in our own way to make transformative change happen, because we know that the system is shit. We know that, or at the very least, it's got a hell of a lot of shortcomings. Not just the planning system, but the whole development industry and amongst other aspects of our society. But unfortunately, it does come down to those of us that are motivated to try and make change happen, to not get discouraged by the elephant in the room, even though very often it's hard not to get discouraged. But we need to keep going. And I think I don't want to make it about human nature and the development at the Phoenix, but this really is an opportunity for us to do something profoundly different and at a sufficient scale that can have an impact for the whole community of Lewis and beyond, we hope. But again, it's going to be up to all of us. Take the health practice in specifically, and Helen alluded to that in her remarks. I mean, they've got a good vision, and there's a lot of stuff they want to do, but a lot of what they want to do is not funded by the NHS.
Which brings me to second elephant in the room, possibly.
Okay.
Which we haven't really tackled is money. And let me just ask Ron, this is presumably a fairly expensive building, the one in Leeds?
Yeah, so actually it's often property developers as donors to Maggie's that are very critical of our building cost to spend. And I suppose we're able to take a different view about not having a short-term, quick return. We're thinking about we want our building to be better in 30 years' time rather than just be lovely for the first 2 or 3 years that it's open. So we take that longer-term life cost. And yes, we could possibly have built more Maggie centres more quickly for less money. But what we wouldn't have done was created these special community spaces that people value and love. And then I think what lifting the quality of the architecture and the building has been part of the carer allows for some of those health shifts that you want to make of an integrated care pathway. So if someone can come in and make their own cup of tea or coffee, who can sit at the kitchen table and develop some peer support, who can then see someone else benefiting from some exercise and think I can join in, who can then think actually I really would benefit from learning how to sleep better at night, doing a relaxation stress management class. It's the integration, and I think that's what the opportunity of this building that you're going to be doing.
Not just the building, but the building in the context of the
But the building
community.
gives the methodology for how the society of people can come in and develop their health.
Well, I was just going to add to what Laura said there, that again, I'm probably freer to speak now I don't work for the NHS anymore, you know, although I used to say this in the NHS as well as and that it's a scandal that the NHS as a corporate organisation can't get its act together to design beautiful hospitals and leaving it to organisations like Maggie's and the private sector to do this, and then our patients, NHS patients, being looked after in beautiful private sector hospitals because the NHS doesn't have space for them. Maybe it does come down to money, but as we all know,
it's not just money.
The capital cost of the building is minute compared to the lifetime costs of the building, but we have a system in the NHS, everyone knows I know about this, sitting to what they call value engineering meetings week after week after week, taking out the quality of the design in order to save pennies, because that's what the cost model says.
You know what Nicholas Pedersen, the great architectural critic, used to say? He says, the English will spare no expense in getting things on the cheap.
Absolutely. But also just I'll wrap it for 1 minute more, rather close to my heart. All this stuff about hygiene, about facilities management, about all that stuff, we take so much of the narrow-mindedness of hospital design. You've battled with it all your working life, I guess, and under your buildings. But most architects just in there and they go, do you know what?
But
I just don't care
it's part
anymore.
to the structure of the build process. Money absolutely matters. You know, we have a defined amount of money we think we can raise, and Thomas and we had to work really hard to get that money to work with the budget and meet the aspiration. But it's a client. If the client is the finance director, you will never get the best aspiration in the longest term. And so you have to fix the client, and that client within the NHS framework is always changing. And so that the person who's letting the contract go is not the same person who starts off with a mission and ambition. And that's the thing that I think is fundamentally wrong in NHS.
Let me bring in gentleman there.
Hello everybody, I'm James Farrell. So I have an organisation called Human Nature Partnership, and something I wanted to say being opened up here. So we've been working with a couple of NHS trusts in East London. The majority of buildings we have in this country will still be there in 50 years. So what we're working with is retrofitting. How do you work with the, let's phrase it, crap 1960s estate, and bring some of these concepts beautifully illustrated by Maggie, who've stolen with pride some of the narrative that you've used there and brought it to all of these hospital trusts. I think there's maybe a bit of a virtuous circle we could close here, which I just wanted to offer that. And I've also then got a quick question, if that's not too cheeky, Mr. Chairman. I think the virtuous circle, I think we need to do something different. And I've been around environment sustainability for 30 years. I think what we're making a mistake if all we're doing is putting bits of nature around things and hoping we're fixing the problem. So yes, we need to ensure that everybody can be close and is close to nature. All of the weight of science, you can read the Lancet, tells you about quality of life years and life expectancy and all of the morbidities that are prevented by living near nature. So there's an imperative to do that for everyone in society. But I think we should start thinking about how do people interact and engage with the nature that is there around their daily lives, whether it's in hospital spaces or in other spaces. And there's some fantastic science now that shows that actually that allows you to get a whole load of other benefits that you don't just get from walking in the park. So you get almost double the life satisfaction, self-esteem, the quality of your relationships with other people actually improves, which is vital for communities and so on. And what's interesting also about that science, is a bit of an offer, is that there are 5 pathways that have been now demonstrated to build that nature connection. So you've got a means of thinking with designers about how do you then put nature in a way that is beautiful. So beauty is a massive one. Creates an opportunity to engage with your emotions and your feelings. Uses your senses, perhaps in ways that we're not usually used to every day. That has meaning, and that comes up a lot today, the importance of meaning, and that allows you to build in context, which you talked about. But then what closes the circle is the 5th one, which is compassion. People who are nature connected are almost twice as likely to take action in their daily lives that is either pro-nature conservation or pro-environmental. So I think when you're talking to the NHS, it's not just about the cost of an intervention. It's hooking it into all of the NHS's objectives, which are also about harnessing the power of their staff and their workforce to take actions that address the climate crisis, that take action to improve health and well-being, and so on. So we've talked a lot about patients today, rightly, but a lot of the work that I've done is also talking to the staff about what they want. One member of staff ate her lunch in her car because there was nowhere for her to have a lunch break. So how do we create spaces that actually we bring the staff with us, and maybe that also helps us in influencing the value engineering.
But I would say that, for example, at Leeds, the new hospital, the determination of the trust to engage with everyone is very, very high. All the staff consulted a number of engagement sessions, especially with children, HIV patients separately, adults, various groups of staff, maintenance staff. I think so. In a way, we don't have to go and talk about this for a long time. But a lot of people are trying and failing. We live in a country where a lot of people are trying very hard and failing. Actually, there's nobody here who would disagree with anything that's been said. But back to your, actually, I think there is an elephant. It's not an elephant because everybody can see it. I think I think the point with the elephant in the room is nobody can see the elephant, but everybody is hyper-conscious of the frustration of so much great imagination, so much passion, so much commitment, not actually building the world we want to see. So I think, I don't want to end on that note. Time is up. I think that what's brilliant is that there is a lot of energy. It almost feels like there'll be a tipping point. And there'll be a tipping point. And with suddenly, because you have to believe that people are against all this, ultimately the truth will be out. Ultimately, it'll self-destruct, if you like. You know, sorry to make it like crass analogy. Like Putin's invasion will self-destruct. There's actually no logical. And if you believe that this cause is the right one, then I think there's huge. That itself is grounds for a lot of optimism. And you know, I've been climate activist for 30 years, and I've been through such terrible times, especially after the coalition government came in, and everything that was built was wrecked. Now it's back again. Cycles come round, led by young people initially. So that's what gives me. But sorry to hijack your excellent contribution. Adrian, we're dying. Sorry, Jill Michael Adrian, small architect. Anyway, very.
I was just the conversation earlier about community involvement, democratic process, and a desire for excellence. We do a lot of work with community groups, and I totally hear what you're saying about the difficulty that individuals feel that they have agency to make and contribute to real change. And I know that the way in which community action and community housing, which is what I've been involved in, happens, is an absolutely disproportionate amount of time that goes into obtaining results. And it takes people with very long-term commitment and passion to make it happen. What is a much easier route is leadership from people who have the power that you're talking about, who wish they didn't. And what I'm hoping in our project here is we will find leadership to make the project happen. Because without that, as an architect, whatever great our ambitions are, they're stymied. Because it takes constant argument and a champion to counter all of this basics that is embodied in the processes and the regulations that we have to deal with. And so I'm hoping that actually there's a massive community participation in Lewes that can get behind the people that we need to lead and feel that they have a commitment from the local people to make change happen, which is where I see some hope here, which you don't see in many places.
Fantastic. Shall we leave it on that note?
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you, speakers, one and all. I hope you found it worthwhile. Thank you, audience participants. Thank you for those who were here for the rest. And
thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
Oh yes. I'm bringing over this French architect, and they've done this amazing urban farm in the centre of Paris. And one building has people who are homeless and vulnerable at work, and they work in the garden. There's a restaurant and a roof garden. So, and she'll be talking on June the 10th, the last of our wood evenings. So anyone interested in that sort of crossover, that. And also just to alert you to the fact that working towards a wood conference it isn't quite this sort of thing, but it is, it isn't. Anyway, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Have the rest of the weekend. I hope the sun goes on shining and it wasn't too blistering.
Thank you.